Hello. And once again, thank you for tuning in to my podcast, Outside the Box. My name is Stephanie K, also known as Sage the Coach. For those of you who don't know me, I am a certified life and relationship coach. I'm also a Christian author. I'm a Bible teacher. I'm an instructor. I'm a lot of things. I always say that. A mother. And so, again, for those who don't know me, that's why you have the coach on the end of my name. Um, and so on my podcast, I like to help people to see that God is bigger than the boxes that we usually put him in, and all these different kind of capacities and stages of life. Because a lot of times it's very easy to lose sight of God, especially when we're going through stuff. And a lot of those things are typically painful things. And so when everything is good, we're good. But when stuff starts getting wonky and bad and we start suffering, that's when the confusion really, really sets in. A lot of times people think that they're doing something wrong and stuff like that. And so I want to kind of dive into that a little bit more today with the book that I recently read by C.S. Lewis called The Problem of Pain. But before I get into that, let me just run a little, it's like the church announcements. We go to church and do the announcements. This is my version of the church announcements. Is that so my show typically comes on Friday at 12:30 p.m. I was not on last week because I was out of town. I was planning to do it from where I was, but it just kind of didn't work out. So I wasn't here last week. And today I was running late. So I'm sorry about that, you guys. I like to try to be consistent and stuff like that, but stuff just kept popping up today and I started late. So I'm starting about 1:45. It's supposed to be at 12:30. I will make sure that I do that or try to stay on time. I'm usually on time, so it's not really a big deal, but I just wanted to acknowledge that I am running late today. So I'm really sorry about that. And so to make sure you follow me on social media, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, I believe. So you can find me on all those platforms and make sure you share my content because there's no point in me doing this. There's no point in talking about these really deep topics if people are not listening to them. I mean, I do this to really help inspire people and again through difficult times. And so you never know who you could bless by sharing this content with them with stuff they might be going through. I also have shows that I've done in the past, and you can look those up. Even if you message me because you have a topic that you're interested in and you kind of don't know how to find it or you don't want to have to look through all the videos that I have done in the past, let me know. I can shoot you a link to those things. And so I've done shows about suicide, drug addiction, miscarriages, divorce. I've done so many different shows, parenting, porn. Like I've done a lot of different types of shows. And so again, I like to use these different topics and scenarios and struggles and situations that we find ourselves in to help people see that God is bigger than the boxes that we usually put him in when we go through these things. Because life is difficult and we need all the help that we can get, as I always say. So back to what I want to talk about today is a book that I recently read by C.S. Lewis called The Problem of Pain. And so I talked about before that I wanted to start doing a little bit of book reviews here, and this is kind of like my first one. I've done stuff about books before, but I always had the author there kind of interviewing them and things like that. But the author is not here because he's dead. And I'm not saying that in a funny way because he wrote this book a while ago. And so he passed away. I forgot the year. I can look it up really quickly while I am, doing this. But this book is amazing. Like I wish he was still alive for us to talk about this because I have just been blown away by this book. When people used to always ask me what is my favorite book, I will always say the Bible because I do love the Bible. And I always tell people that there is so much wisdom in the Bible that even if you don't believe in God, even if you're not a Christian, I mean, you just cannot deny the stuff that's in the Bible. There are things that were written in the Bible hundreds of years ago that people are just now discovering the relevance of now. So, I mean, it's just so much wisdom in the Bible. And so I would always say the Bible. But now this is probably my second favorite book. And so this is a big deal to me because I don't want to say I don't like things very easily, but I don't get too attached to things very easily. Um, and so I like a lot of stuff, but to actually put it in the front of saying that this is my favorite book is a big deal to me. I love this book. This is one of the best books I have ever read. Um, and so I want to say that. Now, for those of you who don't know who C.S. Lewis is, C.S. Lewis is the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. And so a lot of people associate him with like children's movie and things like that. But what you might not know is that even the Chronicles of Narnia is based on Christian principles. The lion in the story that dies for the kids, which I haven't seen in a long time. So forgive me if I'm not doing the plot correctly, but he's a like of Christ. So he's an example of Christ, and now he died for his people and things like that. And so the Chronicles of Narnia is really based on Christian biblical stories and principles and things like that. And so the way that C.S. Lewis, even in that story, really is able to take these very deep concepts and these very I guess I can't come up with another word besides deep, but the way he's able to articulate these very deep and complicated concepts in the Bible and turn them into a children's story, I think it's genius in its own right. I think people who are able to do that, I mean, he was very close with the Tolkien guy, if I'm not saying his name right, who did the oh my goodness, you guys, it's on the tip of my tongue. You know those movies. I'll think of it later. But they were really good friends. And that guy, from my understanding, is a Christian as well. And so to take these very deep concepts and kind of put them into a different setting and kind of give life to it in a way that we not only can detach ourselves from and watch it, but also then put ourselves back in the story. I think it's genius. I think it's really genius. And I'm saying that as a writer, admire other writers and their gifts of writing, because that is not easy to do. You have to have a very vivid but organized imagination to be able to do that. So I'm still trying to think of the guy's name, his Tolkien guy. Oh, I can't think of it. So anyway, they're really good friends, and I really think that even that was very genius of him to do. But another one that he did, another book, is called The Great Divorce. I read that, and I was very captured by that. Like, and that's fiction, and it's about people who are basically in the afterlife and what the afterlife looks like and the kind of things that they're experiencing going through. Like that book, even though it is fiction, it's amazing just the ideas that he comes up with in this story and how he's depicting what the afterlife would be like and how we will be able to reflect on our experience of life and things that we've done. But it takes you into another world. It reminds me of Avatar. So when I first saw the movie Avatar, one of the things that I really liked about it was how it just took you into another headspace. Like, and I really like things that kind of take you outside of your thinking. So if it goes back to the name of my book, I mean the show, which is Outside the Box, I really like things that take you outside of your realm of understanding, because that's what we all should be striving to do. Because when we stay stuck in our own thinking and the way we see in our perspective, it's very limited. And what God is doing to us, especially as we accept Him in our life and we have a relationship with Him, what He actually does, and the Bible talks about renewing your mind, is He is gradually expanding your perception. And so when you start to be partner with Him in that and intentionally work with Him on expanding your perception, this is how you grow. And so I really like things that expand my perception and give me a different perspective on all different types of aspects of life. Again, it goes without saying for my show Outside the Box. I do this in my everyday life. This is not something that I'm doing for the show or, as a gimmicky. This is something that I took from my own life and made a theme around it, because I do this every day. And I love things that help me to do that, because when you get a different perspective of life, I don't know, you feel more full, you feel more well-rounded, you feel more solid. And so anyway, um, so this is how we grow. And growth is our number one thing that we should be doing on this planet, is growing. Everything grows. Trees grows, grass grows, insects grow. We grow. We start off as like little tiny seeds, and then we grow into these big, tall, rusty, hard-head, grown-up people. But we're growing, like we're always growing. And once our bodies gets to a level of growing, of course, it starts deteriorating. Your mind continues to grow from there. So we should be growing. And I always say, if you're not growing, you're dead. Like that's everything that's alive should be growing. So I really like this book because it was like Avatar times 10. Like it really took me outside of my perspective and just saw things from a much, much deeper way, to the point that I'm just really, really grateful for that. Like I dare say that I think this man is a genius. And so okay, let me go back just a little bit. So he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and then he has another fiction book called The Great Divorce. He has a lot of books, by the way, and they're constantly being published. He didn't even think that his books would be as popular as they are. He's been passed away for some time now, and they're still selling. So they're really prolific. But you will mistake him. You will be mistaken if you think he's just a fiction author, because he does a lot of nonfiction. I think he probably has more nonfiction stuff than he has fiction stuff. And so since I did The Great Divorce and I really liked it, I decided to take a jab at his nonfiction stuff. And so, but I did see him as a children's author, just because of the Chronicles of Narnia. I didn't know anything else about him. So once I got into, so I'm scrolling through his catalog. What do I feel like I want to read? I typically ask God to direct me. Hey, what do you think I should read? I book about the Problem of Pain. It took a little bit before I read it because I was reading some other stuff, which I'm going to talk about some of those books too. And I was amazed. I think this man is a genius. Like, I don't even know how to say it's a genius, because you can't really quantify earthly knowledge, because to me, genius is like you have an earthly knowledge. This is a spiritual knowledge. I mean, it's prophetic, no doubt, but I've seen prophetic people that does not get as deep as this guy does, with like dissecting and explaining. And oh my goodness, I love it. It's like the Bible talks about milk and solid food when it comes to your different levels of growing in Christianity. And this is definitely some meat. I don't think the average person could even understand what he's saying if you don't have a solid a base, a solid foundation in Christian understanding. He's gonna go over your head. So and it's some spots where I had to stop and rewind and kind of listen to it again, because I'm like, wow, he's getting really, really deep here. And I was trying my best to kind of grasp what he was saying. But it's amazing. He's a genius. He's a genius. I don't know the significance of that word, but I don't know what else to call him. Like, I love the way he thinks. I love how he breaks down the way he thinks. I love how he explains the way he thinks, and he's connected to other things. It kind of reminds me a little bit of my own writing, because I kind of like to get a little bit theological and kind of break stuff down in my own writing. But I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I cannot say enough how much I love this book. It has definitely risen to number 2 on my favorite books besides the Bible, is the Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. If you have not read it, please read it. It is amazing. If you really want to have a deeper understanding of the purpose that pain plays in our lives, even though he goes into other things that are not necessarily about pain, it's still very good. It's still very, it has a lot of substance, and it gets you to thinking about yourself and life and God and stuff very, very differently. And so just to kind of do a little bit of a summary, and then I'll go into some of the things, a couple more things that I really liked about the book. I'm just going to do a brief overview. I have some notes here in front of me, so I'm going to be looking away for a minute. But he talks about, so the book starts off with an introduction where he just kind of generally talks about the problem of pain, and how the pain is the basis for why a lot of people don't believe in God, because they say, how can there be a God or a good God which is really funny to me. So let me say this really quickly. Some people get upset and say there's not a God because there's pain. But I think that that's a weird thing to say, because if there was pain in the world, I think you would attribute it more to say if there is a God, he's bad, than to say that there's no God, because pain shouldn't exist if there's a God. Like, why wouldn't your conclusion be that, well, if there is a God, he's not a good God because look at the world? But a lot of people conclude that because there's pain in the world that there cannot be a God. And so he goes into explaining why how people can arrive at the conclusion that there is a God, or that there is a God even though there's pain in the world. So he kind of goes into explaining the different reasons why we still believe in God, or why there still is a God even though there's pain in the world. And I'm not going to go into that because I want you to read it, because I want to get to the pain part. So then he talks about why God is not so invested in making us happy all the time. So, again, I'm not going to go into that. And he talks about goodness, God's goodness in comparison to human wickedness, and our need for a savior and salvation, and to kind of go through some of the struggles that we go through in life. And then he talks about what happened to mankind when we drifted away from God, how our nature became corrupted, things like that. And so then after that, he goes into human pain. So he gives three reasons for human pain. So one of them, well, he classifies pain into two categories. So one is a physical sensation. So that's one. And then categories, he does not focus. He says, I'm not going to focus on the physical sensation of pain right now. He talks about it a little bit. He talks about how sometimes pain can be good and blah, blah, blah. But for the rest of the book, he makes it a point to say that he's only going to talk about the mental, kind of spiritual side of pain. So for that part of it, he says, the first reason he says is that people would not surrender to God if all was well. So in the beginning of the book, he talks about the importance of surrendering our free will to our Creator's will. So you'll have to read that if you want to know more about that. And so he sets the foundation for that before he goes into this. So he says the first reason for pain is that people would not surrender if all was well. So pain is recognizable and unmasked evil. And so so the second reason, okay, every man knows something is wrong when he is being hurt. So the first reason, which I just said, is basically that pain gives us a sign that there's a problem. So you can connect this to physical pain. So if you can imagine, say, for example, somebody has gangrene and it's spreading up their leg, but it doesn't hurt at all, then you do not know that there is a problem that you need to tend to. And then, of course, the ultimate outcome is going to be your leg is going to get infected, it's going to spread, you're going to die. But pain actually helps you. It knocks on the door and say, hey, you need to pay attention right here because there's a problem and it needs to be fixed. Most people, when they have consistent pain and they don't really know where it's coming from, will go to the doctor to see what the problem is. And it can be the difference between life and death. It's just that straightforward. And so he says the same thing about us having pain in our lives. And so I will even take it a step further and say that emotional pain is a sign that something is going wrong inside of you. So I talk about this a lot in my books, that when you're reacting to things in certain situations, or you're depressed, or you're acting out, lashing out, especially disproportionate to the situation at hand, it's usually an indicator to a deeper problem. Those reactions come from inner pain. And so they have to come out, they have to be shown. And it's for you to recognize that there's an issue and you need to pay attention to it. Like, you need to work on it, you need to figure it out. It's the same thing as physical pain, it's just internal and it needs to be fixed. And so with him, he's saying, if our lives were not painful, we would not know the seriousness of our fallen condition. And you can't really argue with that. Like, you really can't. So if we were disconnected from God and we were able to just live our lives happily and do what we want to do and have all we want, and we never experienced any grief, any dissatisfaction, things like that, any unmet desire, because the pain comes from a lot of different things, we wouldn't know that we were falling from God. We wouldn't really understand what that means. And so the opposite of stuff always puts those things into context. So I always say death puts life into context. God's goodness is put into context when you understand what evil is. And so we always need that opposite to really put in perspective what each thing represents, and then assign those things value for what they represent. And so he's saying that if we did not have pain, we would not understand the seriousness, and that's key. We would not understand the seriousness of our disconnection from God. And so you can't, I mean, everybody that I know eventually seeks God out because they have some type of pain in their life, whether it's heartbreak, dissatisfaction, whether it's a physical ailment. But that is usually the motivator that gets us to start seeking God, because we do not find the remedy for that pain in our everyday life. So you can't argue with that. You really can't argue with that. I don't think anybody that's happy, and the Bible even says, if you love your life, you'll lose it. If you love your life and you're happy with everything, you're never going to look for God. I mean, you're just not. And then that means if you love your life and you're never going to look for God, then you're going to lose your life, because you're not going to be with the giver of life in the afterlife, which means you're going to lose the very life that you love. So, yeah. So yes, I agree with that. So the second thing is, he says, is that pain shatters the illusion that we have enough for ourselves. And so again, it kind of goes back to the first one, that we would not seek God if it was not having some type of pain in our lives. And then to attach to that, he says that, pain shatters the illusion that we have enough for ourselves. And so I hate to say it, we need it. When you put everything into perspective about us being in our fallen condition and God trying to restore us back to the perfect existence he wanted us to live in, we need pain. I hate to say it. Like, it almost makes me feel sick to say it, because I don't want pain just like anybody else. But I can see how it's necessary for free-willed spiritual beings to become aware of their condition, become aware of their need for help, become aware that there is something going on that's much greater than your immediate needs and wants and desires. Pain disrupts all of that. It disrupts all of that. Everything could be going really well in your life for all intents and purposes. I don't know anybody that happens for, but I'm just saying. And then somebody dies. Boom. It shatters you. It shakes you up, and then you start looking for answers. And so it's needed, especially in our condition. Okay, so he said that. And then 3, which I thought was really interesting. The third reason he said was, we know we're acting for God's sake if the material action of our choice is painful, or at least contrary to our inclinations. This was deep, and I've never heard anybody talk about pain in this way before. But he's basically saying that you don't know you're serving God until it's painful. Right. So just think about that for a second. So he's saying that if you do everything, if everything that God wants you to do is enjoyable to you, how would you know if you're serving God or just serving yourself? Like, there's no way for you to know. A lot of stuff he talks about is based on the mind. And I love the mind. Like, I love reading stuff about the mind. I love understanding the mind. I love analyzing the mind. Like, I'm fascinated with the human mind. So he's saying that for us to be free will beings, we have to understand what we're choosing. And if it's always pleasurable to us to choose it, then we won't really understand what choice we're making, if we're making it for us or we're making it for God, because they seem to like give you the same result. Now, of course, in our pre-fallen condition, that's how it would have been. We would have automatically be doing what God wanted, which would be pleasurable to us, which would in turn be pleasurable to God. But we're not in that state anymore. We have the ability to not choose God. And so how do we know if we're choosing God is when we're doing something that he's asking us to do and it's painful and we're doing it anyway. Like there's no benefit to us whatsoever, but we're still doing it. Then we're making a conscious choice to choose God over our own desires. And that was very, very deep. So he goes into explaining how Abraham's choice to listen to God when it comes to sacrificing his son. And he says that, Abraham making that choice for something that would cost him, like even me, I'm having to think about it and really break it down, made it very clear to him that he was doing what God wants and that he was choosing God over what he wanted, which made his choice more powerful. It opened up his perspective of his loyalty to God, his love for God, the potential and strength that God put in him. Like he just really goes into it, and it is very, 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 very good. I love it. I love it. And so so those are the three reasons. And I'm not really doing it complete justice the way I'm explaining it. I'm trying my best. It is deep, but I would suggest you go read it yourself, because God uses stuff and he says different stuff to different people anyway. So but it's really good. Like I really like it, and you can't really argue with the reasons that he's given. And he even talks about his own pain. He's saying, so yeah, I know you all might be mad at me, saying like, well, why are you justifying pain? How do you act when you're in pain? He says very clearly, I'll tell you how I act. I'm a coward. Like I hate pain just like anybody else. And if it was a way for me to get away from it, I would. Like he really explains it. And he talks about how as soon as the pain lets up, most of the time he will go right back to what he was doing. So the pain is needed to keep him on the right course. Like it's so beautifully explained and so beautifully written. It humbles you. It humbles you as a person to understand that when pain comes in your life, God is using it to refine you. And it's hard. I mean, I'm not even gonna lie. It's some things that I've been through that I'm just like, God, okay, like I can't take much more of this. But he gives you the perspective to step back and understand that all the time that you're hurting and you're suffering, that God is doing something so deep and so great inside of you that it is in your best interest to endure. Like I'm really like, I'm still digesting it, and I'm going to read it again. And I typically don't like, when it comes to movies and books, even if I do read them a second time or watch them a second time, it's going to be some ways away. Like, so if I watch a movie, I might watch it 2 times the first time and that's it. And then if I watch it again, it's going to be a while away. I have never read a book twice, except the Bible. This one, I'm going to read at least 2 or 3 more times. Like, it was that good. So, and you have to, because he has so many ideas jam-packed in there. You're not going to remember everything. So it's good to go back and see it. So yeah, he talks about he goes into a lot of deep stuff. He even goes into when the Bible talks about the benefit of pain, because if pain is bad, if pain is good, then why do we get an outlet from it sometimes? And then why does God want us to be happy or pushes us towards happiness? So he goes into a lot of kind of deep thoughts about that. And so you have to read it if you want to know the rest. I'm almost up with my time. But then he goes into a little bit more about pain, kind of breaking down God. At the end of everything, he wants us, we don't have to, the aim is not for us to stay in pain. It's for us to kind of cross over into a more pleasurable existence. So he kind of talks about that. Then he goes into hell, which I really like what he said about hell. Again, some of it is not necessarily scriptural, but it's not necessarily against scripture, but it does make you think. Like, it does make you think. So he says something about hell not necessarily being that you're burning forever, but that you are in the process of being, what, I can't explain. You just have to read it. And then his last chapter is on, not the last chapter, but the second to last chapter is on animal pain, which I thought was really interesting, because the last few weeks I have been finding myself in conversation with people where I'm talking about animals a lot and how fascinating they are and why God created them and our role with animals and things like that. So he talks about animal pain, like basically if God is just and we're in pain, so God is trying to renew us, then why are animals in pain? Because they are not free will beings and they didn't do anything, and that seems unjust for them to be in pain when they can't even make the choice that our pain will inspire. And so he talks about that. He also talks about in the last chapter, he talks about heaven, um, and how it kind of plays into the whole scenario. So it's a very, 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 very good book. I know I've said that like 100 times already, but I can't sing enough praises for this book. It is beautifully written. It is really deep. It is very insightful. I really like his combination of intelligence because it's very clear that not only is he intelligent, but he has a prophetic gift, and he's very deep and insightful. But on top of that, there's a lot of compassion in what he's saying, and I think that's important because a lot of times you get people who are really, really. It seems like intelligence, as human beings, intelligence increase, they become less compassionate, and I really like that he is has this level of insight and everything, but he still has a lot of compassion there. To me, it displays the nature of God. God is as the most powerful being. He can do anything, but at the same time, he's still very, very compassionate and cares about me and you individually when there's really absolutely no reason to. And so, so yeah, so I like that part about him too. And so, the last thing that I kind of want to go into before I wrap up today is um, the overall thing that he that I got from his book is that there's a purpose to our pain, and that God understands our struggles with it, but is a necessary tool to achieve the ends that He desires, which has very little to do with our small perspective that we're looking through the world in. Like He's trying to redeem His creation, and His creation is not just me or you. Which he another thing is that he talks about these huge concepts and then he makes it personal. He said, don't be thinking about your neighbor and your friends and all this stuff. Think about you. Think about where you are with God and where you should be and things like that. But I like how he takes these very big concepts and I mean I like how he explains things not only from a personal level, but you to kind of step back and see things from God's perspective, because he's not just trying to save me and you. He's trying to save his creation, which is trillions. Trillions is more than billions, so I don't know what's after trillions. An uncountable amount of people. We talking about since the beginning of creation until the end. He is trying to save his creation, which is us, the planet, the universe, the animals. Like he is trying to do that. And a lot of times we're just looking at our little small keyhole of life that we can see, and then we're kind of judging what he does and what he doesn't do based on that. But he really gives you the opportunity to step back and kind of see things from God's perspective, not from our perspective and what we want and what we don't like and what we need and what God should do. But know that we are actually subject to God and that he can do what he wants. We have to understand how he operates if we want to get the benefit, the biggest benefit from our lives. But that God's ultimate plan is for us to be loved, for us to be happy, for us to live pleasurable lives. And this is the path that must be taken in order to get there. Now, you can argue with that and say, well, why does this have to be the path? But something that he says is you're wasting your time. You cannot change the path. You cannot change God. You cannot argue with God. I tell my kids sometimes, you can't take God to court. So anybody who has a problem with how God does things, you're just jacked up because you can't compete with him. It is better for you to submit to him because he has total control and try to figure out what to do to make him happy and please him, and what you know, instead of you just arguing with him because it's a discussion you can't win. So we can all point fingers. I've actually met people who will say, if I was God, I could do this better than God. Okay, very stupid statement, but you're not God. You can never be God. That will never happen. So how about you get on board with reality and think about what's actually happening and how to maneuver through that, instead of wasting all your thought power on something that is not even possible. And I thank God that no human being on the earth is God, because if he was, we would all be in trouble, as I'm sure you all know, human beings. So I love people though, so don't get me wrong, but we a little messed up. I will say that. And he talks about that in the book, how you have to be honest with your condition. Like if you just looking at yourself that you're not that bad, having to go through pain in life, you will always find a way to avoid it or around it or make it seem like you don't deserve it. But when you understand your condition, how bad you really are, not as a society, not as a community, but you individually, you see your flaws, your imperfections in yourself, and you come to terms with, you know what, I do some jacked up stuff sometimes, then you will understand the need for God to refine you, and you won't be so resistant to the pain that he allows and sometimes brings into your life to help you to become a better person. But you have to be real with where you're at, because if you're not, you're going to resist it. But when you, even if you are real where you are and you don't want to be in pain, but because you want to be better, you will push through, you will cooperate, you will, even if you have to cry, you'll do it because you're like, I don't want to be jacked up. Like, I don't want to be jacked up. So if I have to go through this to not be jacked up, then let's go. Just make it fast. Like, you know. So anyway, that's it about my book review, my very mini book review on The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. I loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. I would definitely recommend everybody to read it. There's some other his stuff that I want to read now. I just like the way he explains his mind. And so that's it. So you guys make sure you tune in next Friday at 12:30 p.m. I will be on time then for another episode of Outside the Box. Make sure you share, like my page, my content. Send me any questions or comments that you might have about my show, any future shows, any past shows. Let me know. And I think that's it. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. You be blessed and have a great weekend. Bye.